Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in. This is Adesoji Speaks Knowledge, a show for seekers of authentic information on Africa past and present. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, an African history scholar with years of study in the bag. For more information on Africa's history and geopolitics, subscribe to Adesoji Speaks Knowledge on YouTube. Without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Good day, everyone, wherever you join us from, and welcome again to African News Review. As usual, I have Comrade Milton Allimadi on with me. He teaches African history at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. He holds a degree in journalism from Columbia University, economics from Syracuse University. He is an explorer in his free times and has renamed a couple of rivers across the continent and Europe. And also he is the author of Manufacturing Hate, How Africa Was Demonized in Western Media. Again, I welcome Brother Milton Allimadi to the show.
Thank you, Conrad. Asante sana.
Yes, it's been a long week, as they would say, and we've had a series of events that has been talked about in the Western media, not the least the South African elections,
Yes.
the recent military gains in the Sahel, the conference in Kenya talking about financial aid to the continent, and last but not the least, the most interesting part, Nigeria deciding to sing a new old tune, as they would say. Brother Milton will help pass his own unique take on the events of the week. We begin with the first one, obviously, the most important.
Right.
The recent elections in Kenya and very important, South Africa. Oof. The recent elections in South Africa and the first one in 30 years, and after the fall of apartheid, obviously. And we go to the Economies for its unique take on what transpired. And let's do this. It says, the African National Congress, the ANC, continent's oldest liberation movement, the spearhead of resistance to apartheid since 1995, is no longer a hegemonic force in South African politics. The results have now been declared, and we know that to be a fact. But the reason this article stood out at me was its take on things. And I've highlighted some parts, and I would read them out and get Brother Milton to respond. It goes, as a consequence, the next fortnight, which is last week, we'll see the most important political negotiation in South Africa since the talks in the early 1990s that ended white rule. That is immediately a red flag. Though the precise results, including those in concurrent provisional elections, will dictate all the possible routes, the paths ahead as essentially two possible outcomes: pragmatism or populism. What the president and other politicians decide in the days ahead will determine the direction of the country for years to come. The entry of Nkumtu Sigwe, MK, led by Jacob Zuma, whom Mr. Ramaphosa replaced in 2018, gave many of the disaffected a new vehicle. The party, named after the ANC Old Arm Wing, is projected to come third in the first election it has ever contested. A stunning feat. Now, there is one. Okay. But at the time of writing, the ANC seemed to have fallen so low it will require a deal with larger parties to stay in power. This could mean a pact with one or two of its extremist offshoots, MK and the Economic Freedom Fighters, which on current projection looks as if it will be the fourth largest party. Many moderates in the ANC, including Mr. Ramaphosa, will instinctively dislike the prospect. Now, this is a bit that will get Brother Milton hot under the collar. Another option would be for the ANC to turn to the DA, Democratic Alliance, the country's main opposition party, which is projected to win around 22% of the vote. This will in effect mean a sequel of the post-1994 national unity. Now, here is the bit. It will increase the chances of South Africa having a sensible government with centrist policies. John Steenhuisen, the DA leader, told The Economist in 2021 he would want to try to cut a deal with moderates in the ANC rather than see the ruling party join with the AFF and take South Africa in the direction of Venezuela or Zimbabwe. There is no reason to believe he has changed his mind in the years to come. Your take, Brother Milton.
Well, the Economies, of course, is the Bible of imperialism and global capitalism. And the headline alone just shows the resentment that apartheid was ever defeated in South Africa. The headline of the article said, the failing ANC is rejected by over half of South Africans. All right, so over half of South Africa, according to economists, rejected the ANC. And by implication, given the recommendation that the ANC should form an alliance with the white-led party, the DA, Democratic Alliance, so she formed the coalition. So there are many false suggestions and elements in the story.
Okay.
The primary false suggestion is that the ANC was rejected because South Africans want a government that includes the European-led party. That is the implication. So the implication is that the European-led party must have done very well to deserve those honors and deserve to be embraced by Africans in South Africa. The Democratic Alliance got 22%. In the 2019 election, the Democratic Alliance got 21%. So those who yearn for the era of apartheid, even though they control the finances of the country, they control the major levers of the economy, they control the major private media conglomerate, with all those resources, they were able to expand, broaden their appeal by 1 percentage point. So it's false to suggest that neoliberalism made any gains in this election. It's completely false. In fact, the headline should be, democracy is working in South Africa. You have an African country where the democratic structure they adopted after the collapse of the racist system of apartheid, the most fascist anti-democratic system that we had witnessed in the 20th century, was replaced by a democratic structure. Even with all the evils and crimes of the apartheid regime over the decades, Africans have not been vengeful, even though the structures of apartheid still exist. Europeans make up 7.3% of the population but control 72% of the agricultural land. Level of unemployment is 36%. Yet the European unemployment is only 7.2%. Africans are not vengeful. They're not saying, let's tear down this democratic system and let's have a revolution so that we can equalize the economic dispensation in this country. That should be the first thing that the economists should be discussing. The victory of democracy, the fact that Africans are law-abiding, very much law-abiding, given what...
You went low there a bit.
Second, a main story is that the ANC actually held its ground. If you count the offshoots of the ANC, that the
Terror. Correct. Yeah. Anti-West values. The dog whistle.
So if you see 40%, the new party of Jacob Zuma, 15%, and Malema's party, economic freedom fighters of Julius Malema dipped a little bit from 10% to 9.5%. If you add all those together, then you see that the ANC has actually the vote that it used to have in the past. It has 40, it has 50, it has 65%, right? Different forms of the ANC, different versions of the ANC. I would have been much more remorseful and disappointed at the Democratic Alliance and the gains that now go to the EFF, the 10% and the 15% to Umkhonto.
Yeah.
That is 25%. So if you add that 25% to the 22%, the Democratic Alliance would be at 47%. It would actually
making them the majority party.
The mandate bigger than the ANC. Then it would justify the headline. The failing ANC is rejected by over half of South Africa. You see? So you have to know how to read these things to expose the deception of the Economist magazine. Okay, so now here's the big question. The big question going forward in the next 5 years, before the next election. What will happen? What will old school ANC do? What will Umkhonto do? Obviously, Jacob Zuma is a senior citizen. I don't expect that he's
going to return.
Be president in the future. And what will the party that is right now the main part of the youth, the economic freedom fighters, do between these three parties?
Correct.
It seems that not one of them alone is able to transform South Africa the way it needs to be done. And of course, you're working against entrenched elements who want to hold on to their privileges internally with their supporters overseas, who of course are investors in the mining industry and the stock market in South Africa. So they have the domestic privileged class and the external privileged class. So I don't think the ANC alone will be able to deal with them, the official version of the ANC, or Umkhonto, or the EFF. So they need to decide how they're going to come together and work it out. Obviously, if you have a partnership only of EFF and Umkhonto official are going to abandon ANC official and just en masse move to Umkhonto or EFF or even alliance between Umkhonto and EFF. There seems to be that these three elements have to work together conference and say, what is it that we want to do with power? Do we want economic justice? Many African countries have discovered that formal independence alone
doesn't cut it.
Worth anything beyond being on paper. To transform the economy, to elevate the lives of the masses of Africans, you need to control economic production and your natural resources. These three parties coming together and appealing to the electorate have a better chance of doing it individually. Of course, the Democratic Alliance is a party of the privileged European class. And any Africans, any black members that they have are people that they just use as tokens. And the evidence is clear because they're not in the leadership position in that party. So that's my assessment of the election, the results, and that's also my critique and analysis of the economies. The economies yearn for the, good old days of apartheid. Of course, they can't say that. So it's talking about a government of national unity that prevailed when Mandela became president, democratically elected president of South Africa, because there were others who were pretenders. You cannot, the majority of the population, and then call yourself president of South Africa. Those were just pretenders. Usurpers. The first president of South Africa really was Nelson Mandela.
Mandela. So, one final question there. So, what would you read into? We would not want to turn South Africa into Venezuela or Zimbabwe.
When you say, obviously, they use that as a quote, right? So they can say, oh, this is coming from the Economists, right? But they know what the quote was referring to. So they could have elaborated. The fact that they did not was a conscious choice. Because Zimbabwe has been demonized, Venezuela has been demonized. So, they let that rest the way it is. So people can say, oh, that would be awful if it became like a Zimbabwe.
Can you quickly just explain the reason why Zimbabwe is used as a battering ram beyond the demo? I mean, just give us like a 3 minutes history lesson as to why Zimbabwe is constantly being referred to, and Venezuela as well.
Oh, we don't even need the 3 whole minutes. I mean, the Europeans came in the 1890s. They committed massacres against the Mashona and Matabele and took their land and took their cattle and killed their people and made them landless and turned them into enslaved type laborers on farms that belonged to Africans that overnight became European owned. And of course, this was in fact the resistance, and they call it the Chimurenga, the first Chimurenga in the 1890s when these Africans fought to regain their land or to defend their land. Of course, they had some victories, but they had more losses than victories. They did not have the sophisticated weapons that the Europeans had. And ultimately, it became Rhodesia after imperialist Cecil Rhodes, the mass murderer. And the second Chimurenga was when the nationalists, led by Robert Mugabe and Richard Nkomo, led the national liberation struggle, and they defeated Rhodesia's version of apartheid in 1980. And at the time of that victory, the British and the Americans agreed that they would provide financing so that the new African government can buy back the land from the descendants of the Europeans who stole the land in the 1890s. The money never came, and ultimately, the Zimbabweans under Robert Mugabe went to Plan B. They expropriated the land. They said they would compensate for the structures built on the land and any development built on the land, but that they would not pay for the land which was originally stolen. And of course, there was a backlash by imperialism led primarily by Britain, led to the economic sanctions. The United States joined their kith and kin in sanctions as well. Industrious and very, very well educated. The economy, of course, is doing terribly. The inflation was phenomenal because they were cut off from access to foreign credit, normally import-exports. So, of course, they don't give you the complete story. They just give the impression that here is what happened when you have Africans running the show.
Money in the gut.
Without Europeans.
Thank you very much. So that's why I think, exactly. So that is why this
selling has.
Correct. That is why this channel is important.
Venezuela. Of course, here you have a pariah nation. And of course, the truth is that Venezuelans don't want to be a neo-colonial state. They were supporting Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution. And for that, and of course, Chavez himself was anti-imperialist and capitalist. Chavez won democratic elections. The U.S. tried to undermine him, a coup d'etat. The people went to the streets and brought Chavez back in power, sent the military back to the barracks. How many times did that happen in history?
It will not be televised, yes.
So that puts in context that reference to Zimbabwe and Venezuela.
Thank you very much. Thinking of the military, now we go to our next story, which is essentially the military playing games. It's the U.S. military. Recently, the U.S. military completes major exercise in Africa and works to deepen partnership. High-ranking military officials from the US and top African allies watched intently as dust and flames shot up from pieces of the Sahara Desert hit by tank and artillery fire. They looked up as pilots flew F-16s into formation, and they listened intently as Moroccan and American personnel explained how they will set up beachheads to defend the Atlantic coastline in the event of a potential invasion. In the part of the war games this year, as military confronts new challenges in increasingly volatile regions, the finale of the 2-week event celebrated Africa's Lion 20-year anniversary and how partnership between the US and African militaries have expanded since it began. The exercise has grown over the years since 2004, and not only have the number of multinational service members that train, but also the scope of the training as well, which have expanded to much more than just security. The last and the final part is here. The United States is holding steadfast to its strategy of coupling weapons assistance and intelligence sharing with initiatives designed to boost civilian populations and strengthen institutions. But it faces new competitions. Despite after decades of colonialism, Africa has once again been absorbed in the fight between great powers, with Western influence waning and countries accepting more economic and military support from China firms and Russian contractors. What do you make of that?
So it reminds me of the book by Odinga, Kenya's first vice president, under Jomo Kenyatta, and the father of Raila Odinga, who's a major political player in Kenya and a former prime minister and opposition leader. And the book's title was Not Yet Uhuru. And I also strongly recommend that book to all comrades. You can order it by Amazon. And he analyzed what had transpired in Kenya shortly after independence. And he came to that conclusion. Of course, Uhuru is the Israeli word for independence, for freedom. And explained why Kenya was not yet independent. And to me, this type of so-called military exercise is the clearest manifestation that Africa is not yet Uhuru. How many times do you have African militaries coming to the United States to train the American military? What is so special about the American military that they have the right to go and so-called train soldiers, right?
Yeah.
Where do they get that special privilege or permission from? They have some special knowledge. They're blessed, ordained by the Creator with special military skills to have the arrogance and privilege to be going around the world training, so-called training African soldiers. You know, that's just a superiority in complex that we accept and take for granted, which to me is very dangerous and very reactionary. So why do you want independence now for your countries? If you're
I thought we were having partnerships. I thought it was military partnership.
Okay, so it's like a partnership or alliance. It's like having a cripple with no legs in a partnership with Usain Bolt, the 100-meter, 200-meter former global champion. What kind of partnership is that? You're saying you're going to run a rally. So I'm going, you run the first 100 meters, you crippled man, and then hand the baton to me. You're saying that I will finish it. That's the type of partnership they have, It's preposterous, really. And then they talk about the beachhead, set up a beachhead against a potential invasion. Invasion from whom? The mere fact that you have the United States military there, so-called training you, is that not an invasion already? I don't get it. It's preposterous. And of course, the writer is just, a typical neo-colonial type writer parroting, talking about these scenes in the desert or things blowing up. All that nonsense. There's no analysis at all. These are the type of useless articles that we get on a constant basis from corporate media with no analysis at all. And then, firstly, that sense of, Africans as global beggars just sitting there with their hands open, saying, oh, no, we don't just give them weapons. We actually do things that help build the economy or social services. We build clinics, right? So you go, you build a little clinic there, and you leave a few Advil or aspirins, and then you leave, and that's it, and then you call that economic development, right? It's just amazing.
So, one more question in that.
Here's the key thing, actually. I'm sorry that I left out. And they talk about that part of the African continent being troubled, right?
Volatile.
And yet, the writer does not mention a single word, the reason why it's very troubled. It was not always like that. It became like that after the United States and its NATO partners went to Libya and destroyed Libya in 2011, killed Colonel Gaddafi, destroyed the government, and dispersed all those arsenal of weapons all over the region. That's not even mentioned in the article. It's just mind-boggling and amazing. But, if we don't have people who critique these types of articles on a show such as the platform that you have, we are victimized on a daily basis by, I call them the weapons of mass deception, which is what the corporate media really are,
So you've heard it here. Do hit the like button, subscribe, and share. And so we can get this message out there, because media being one of the sources of control, what's the saying? Mind is a terrible thing to waste. If you're well informed, then you can't be hoodwinked. Malcolm X said...
and as to paraphrase also our comrade Chief Biko, the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the control of the minds of the oppressed,
Yes. So, speaking of the mind oppressed, we'll go to Kenya, the land of Mr. Odinga again. And there was a
now the show is Mr. Ruto, who is also and now a U.S. special ally, non-NATO ally. I don't even know what that means, and the same analogy I just provided applies.
Yes.
You're saying both and the cripple.
Okay, so here we go. African campaigners demand reform of unjust global system. Very interesting. Africans are being crippled by costly loans and unfair interest rates. Campaigners in Nairobi warned at a key summit this week as they demanded a rebalance of global financing. Africa is at a crucial moment of its development, and Desiree Asogbovu of the One Campaign, a global NGO dedicated to fighting poverty and inequality. High food and energy prices are contributing factors as political instability and climate shocks. Despite this, Africa's Bank, which turns 60 this year, expects growth to start picking up from 2024. Lending bodies such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund were created 80 years ago with the post-World War II Bretton Woods Agreement at a time when most countries did not even exist, he told Radio France International. The AFDB, African Development Bank, created in 1963, and its African Development Fund, operational since 1974, are seen as more understanding of the needs of African economies. The One Campaign is calling for that fund to be replenished to the tune of $25 billion. Governments across the continent needs vast resources, says Kenya's President William Ruto at the summit. What say you?
All right. So and that is, again, the same policy that corporate media and imperialism keeps propagating and feeding Africans and non-Africans, by the way, globally. First of all, growth is not the same thing as development. Okay? So you can have economic growth and underdevelopment at the same time.
True.
African countries can only develop by increasing the margin of profit that they retain from what they produce. And what do they produce right now? Primarily agricultural so-called raw materials. They also produce natural resources such as forest products. They also produce mineral resources such as metals, gas, petroleum, and so forth. Right?
Yep.
So currently, all of those products are sold at a fraction of their value to the industrialized countries that then use those resources to use in factories to manufacture products that are not manufactured in African countries, such as automobiles. Somebody might say, wait, but South Africa and Nigeria, a few of these countries produce automobiles. No, they're assembled. They don't manufacture from scratch. Ford does not import the elements that go into their vehicles from foreign countries, right? If they do, it's just because of cheap labor, and it will be minor parts, right? The major component are built by the well-paid, unionized workers at all these automobile plants in Detroit, right? And then they sell these products from all these industrialized countries, whether from North America, whether from Europe, whether from Japan, and now, of course, from China, sell it back to Africa at prices that are grossly, exponentially multiplied relative to the raw materials that, in most cases, come from Africa. So that's one thing they need to do. Retain the higher proportion of the profit, number one. Number two, they need to actually manufacture the products that they now import from industrialized countries within Africa. And of course, the continent has a population of 1.3 billion people. The continent, if they traded amongst themselves.
What? Mm-hmm.
The interest rates and the cost of credit so that we can borrow more money to continue exporting raw materials to the industrialized country, right? So that is like somebody going to their bank and saying, please cancel some of my credit card debt, lower the interest rate, and then the bank accepting, and then you continue consuming, and then you build up the debt all over again. So you're in a cycle. You're not developing. Okay, so let me explain the part when I said growth does not equal development. Development implies and involves structural changes. It involves the cocoa. I don't know what they do in terms of cleaning the cocoa, the processing, and then taking the beans,
the drying,
drying, and whatever else you do with it, and then ultimately feeding it in a factory in Ghana or Ivory Coast. Uganda also produces some cocoa in Uganda, and then when it comes out in the form of chocolate. It's well packaged, and then you sell that either domestically. I don't know, myself, I'm not a big fan since sugar is not such a good thing, but this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. You sell it either domestically in Africa, or you export it to Europe, you export it to Asia, export it to North America, and now you're getting real money. If you go to a Whole Foods and you see, or you go to a specialty chocolate store, you see these tiny boxes, well packaged, just $50 for a tiny box, a larger box, it's $100. You should be getting a good proportion of that amount, not just selling it in big sacks at literally
at ridiculous prices.
Ridiculous low prices, and shipping it as raw material. So that is what you get. But here's the misleading thing when they talk about growth. When they say growth is about to resume in 2024. is meaningless. What has historically happened is that sometimes the demand for cocoa, the demand for tea, the demand for coffee, the demand for these raw materials appreciates.
Yep.
So when it appreciates, it means the price goes up. It means now each one of these dependent African countries are getting more revenue for the same
as a result of that demand
that they're producing. So then when they add up the stats at the end of the year, there was economic growth. It's nonsense. It's not growth. Because within a year or two, the prices are going to collapse again. So you are constantly dependent on the ups and downs of the market. In order to have growth, real growth and development, you need to industrialize. So that is the only solution Africa. That's not the discussion they're having in Nairobi. They're having a begging discussion. Please, 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 lower the cost of credit for us so we can continue running our dependent structural economy and exporting raw materials to the rest of the world. It's a useless conversation.
And I also like to add, there was the talk of Bretton Woods there. For those who are not unfamiliar, the Bretton Woods Agreement was essentially the meeting between Winston Churchill and Mr. Roosevelt, then U.S. President. What was the talk about? It was about how to move away from the constant need to revert to war. So in order to do so, certain organizations came into being. The League of Nations at the time morphed into the United Nations. That was in 1945. The World Bank came into being 1946. The IMF 1947. The General Agreements on Trade and Tariffs, which will eventually become the World Trade Organization, came into being in 1948. In order to lock all of this into play, you had a governing body, which was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So when Brother Milton said earlier that they sat there while they were bombing the deserts and what have you, that is effectively saying this is who we have to control the entire system. If you get out of line, this is who will spank you back into position. So again,
and that's an important part because this is sadly not taught enough in schools, even in the West, in the industrialized countries, and of course not in our African countries. It is a global system that exists, which has existed for at least 5 centuries.
Correct.
A global system. It is out here and there, but it's the same global system that started with enslaving Africans. That is the best way to extract the total value. All the profits that each African would have generated for himself or herself, producing on their own farm or what have you in an African country, is removed and transferred to the European who now, quote unquote, owns this individual. When that system ended, because it was slowing down the growth of capitalism, because now you need people to work in factories. And you can't have them in factories if you have them on the plantation at the same time. So they ended the old style slavery and introduced a new form of slavery, which was, of course, of colonialism. They work on your European plantation, the land you took away from their ancestors, but then they go back to their small so-called huts and come back in the morning to continue working for you. You're exploiting them. You left. You gave them so-called independence. You continue exploiting them. And now you have the organization that we just mentioned.
Yeah.
The World Bank, the IMF, the WTO.
WTO.
They regulate the cost of capital. And one of the conditions they give you to borrow money is that thou shalt not industrialize.
Imagine.
Yep. Because how can they allow you to compete with them? You see how they go head to head with China, right?
Yep.
Because China has emerged as a global power, exporting manufactured products all over the world, cutting into markets that used to be the exclusive domain of
the imperial power.
So you think they're going to help create another China in Africa? You must be out of your mind.
Which was the argument of Brother Walter Rodney in his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa.
No, really. No, I think we're out of our minds to think that imperialism is going to aid you into becoming another China so that you can cut into the profit margin. It's preposterous. Logic alone will tell you, first of all, if imperialism within their own country, right, they compete viciously, right? Companies compete viciously here within the United States. They steal sometimes from each other, right?
Yep.
They form monopolies to keep competitors, out of business. And then suddenly they're going to go to Africa to help Africans. Come and compete with us.
No way. Yeah, I mean, you must be out of your rockers, as they will say.
Why are we joking?
And on that aspect, would you say? I mean, some will argue that okay, we cannot compete with the European powers. Not that we cannot, but they choose not to. But then the European powers will say, but we aid you, we'll provide you with aid every now and then, and you guys are mismanaging aid. So what would you say to that line of argument?
I would say that's a big lie. They don't give us aid. We give them aid. If I come to your house and I say, Adesoji, I like the glasses, you're wearing, I'm going to buy it from you for £1. Or I like the headset you have. I don't care what you think the value is. I'm going to buy that for £1 as well. That mic you have over there. I want to give you £1 for that as well. You see, you have a collection of impressive books in your case. Okay,
not
you
the
have
books.
a couple of hundred books. I'll give you £2 for that. And then I say, Adesoji, you're really doing very hard. I'm going to give you £100 in foreign aid. So you're reporting that, wow, £100 in foreign aid, or €100 to Adesoji from Milton. The same Milton that just robbed him something that might be valued at £1,000. And that happens on an annual basis when we sell our minerals and agricultural products and our natural resources for dirt cheap, and then get a few trinkets in the form of a few billion in so-called foreign aid. That's public relations.
I mean, to support your point, there was an article written in 2017 by War on Wants. So waronwants.org. It was penned by a British gentleman, Mark Curtis. And his argument in the article was the fact that there were about 17 companies in Europe come into Africa, take out raw materials to the excess of $197 billion US. At that time, the combined debt of the African countries, the top 3 African countries, was $67 billion.
Forget the debt. It's the interest on the debt is where they make money, because they know they can never pay off that principal.
Exactly.
But every year they'll be servicing that debt. That's income. That's money in the bank for the European lenders perpetually. And they talk about giving us foreign aid. It's preposterous. It's the other way around. We subsidize the high standard of living for Europeans. And that is what is the West Africa they're trying to change now. So when they talk about the cool belt and they deride those schools, they're not analyzing why those schools are happening in Niger, in Mali, in Burkina Faso. France knows where it's happening. The United States knows why it's happening.
But the general population should not be made aware of the reason for.
The general population, there you go. Africa instability. Another coup here, another coup there.
The volatile region.
Well, these coups actually are significantly different from many previous coups in the past. And of course, one sign to see how different they are is to look at whether they're condemned or tolerated by the West. So, for example, when there was a coup in Chad, not only did they not condemn it, Emmanuel Macron flew to N'Djamena for the swearing in of the new military leader, the son of the previous military leader,
Idris
Deby, his son Muhammad Deby, after his father was killed, launched a coup and seized power. So they endorsed that. On the other hand, they were not happy by the one in Niger. Because in the one in Niger, the population embraced it and they said, we want to be paid for our uranium. Then, of course, France was trying to get ECOWAS to invade. But ECOWAS found that it could not do so because Niger stood together with Mali and Burkina Faso. They said, any invasion of one of us, we see an invasion of all. We will resist collectively, you see? So whether they meant it or not, it had impact. No invasion occurred. These are the kind of transformations that are going on in Africa. Africa is demanding equitable returns on their resources. And that's the path we need to take. And we can do it. Of course, we can develop. They need us more than we need them. But it's the mindset that's been colonized. We need to decolonize our mind. Sankara was doing a very brilliant job in that. Burkina Faso, he released the intellect and creativity of his citizens. He released neo-colonialism from their mind. He said you can actually create and produce for yourself. You can be independent, and he proved it. They used to import food. Within 3 years, they had food self-sufficiency. These are the kind of approaches that every African country needs. If we do it within 10, 15 years, they will be running to get official aid. Right now, they get aid by undercutting the value of our resources. But if we do it the correct way in 15 years, they'll actually be flying to Nairobi, European leaders, to ask for official loan that they signed for, you know.
You're about to frighten the natives. So, yes, talking about singing new tunes. Nigeria recently did the impossible. We went the other route using we. I don't know why. Okay, I suppose I should use we. Okay, so Nigeria's new anthem, written by Britain, sparks criticism. Nigeria adopted a new national anthem Wednesday after lawmakers passed a law that replaced the current one with a version dropped nearly half a century ago, sparking widespread criticism about how the law was hastily passed without much public input. President Bola Tinubu's assent to the law came a day after it was approved by both chambers of the Nigeria's National Assembly, which is dominated by the governing party. The federal lawmakers introduced and passed the bill in less than a week, an unusual fast process for important bills that usually take weeks or months to be considered. The Arise O Compatriots anthem has been in use since 1978 when it was introduced by the military government. The anthem was composed at a time when the country was reeling from a deadly civil war and called on Nigerians to serve our fatherland with love, strength, and not let the labor of our heroes past to be in vain. The new version takes immediate effect as it was introduced in 1960 when Nigeria gained independence from Britain before it was dropped by the military, titled Nigeria We Hail Thee. It was written by Lillian Jane Williams, a British expatriate who was living in Nigeria at the time. Oh, God. Oh, God. Right. In the 21st century in Nigeria, the country's political class found a colonial national anthem that has pejorative words like native land and tribes to be admirable enough to foist on our citizens without their consent. Ezekiel Sili posted on Twitter, formerly known on X, formerly known as Twitter. Supporters of the new anthem, however, argue it was wrong for the country to have adopted an anthem introduced by the military. Anthems are, listen to this projection. Anthems are ideological recitations that help people to be more focused. It has a very sad development for the military to have changed the anthem, public affairs analyst Frank Tiete said. Your take.
All right. Well, actually, it's very sad that it's happened. Something like that. I think it captures really the condition of disarray lack of direction in terms of what's happening in other parts of Africa, including a major country such as Nigeria. I wonder what a public, a wide survey, a poll would have yielded. I would like to have seen the result of polling to see what ordinary Nigerians thought of something like that. Obviously, yes, these are elected, whether they're senators or
representatives
in Nigeria and parliament. They don't really represent the thoughts of the individual Nigerians. So I wish the poll had been commissioned, or even a referendum, right? National anthems, okay, it's what we say, it's symbolic and symbolism, but these are some of the important things. State symbols. When we talk about the national flag, of course, people will go to war if you burn the national flag, right? So, of course, anthems also has that kind of same weight and connotation.
Very emotive as well.
So now, you have an anthem written by Lillian Jean Williams, a British woman who had lived in Nigeria. I don't care how long she had lived in Nigeria. Why should she be the person to capture the essence of Nigeria? Because that's what an anthem is supposed to do.
Could you repeat that part, please?
Summarize your past, summarize your present, and summarize your potential futures. That's what an anthem implies. And I don't believe that a European, a descendant of the colonizers, can capture that essence. I want the descendants of the victims of that colonization to tell me that story in the form of an anthem. Okay, so when you talk about, okay, this one came after military rule. Well, frankly, military rule has been a large feature of Nigeria's history.
Correct.
The Civil War was a large feature of Nigeria's history.
Yep.
To ignore that would be preposterous. So to me, that was not a disqualifier at all.
And also the fact that the military was representative of the country.
Absolutely. So I went and I heard both anthems. And I must tell you that Nigeria We Hail Thee, which is the 1961
version,
the European, sounds like a popular pop song or something like that. It's jovial, melodic, and but it really does not contain much. And it has references through, though tribes and tongues may differ, we should come together as one Nigeria. Okay. So, first of all, the term tribes, that's a European imported term to describe Africans that in many cases were actually nations and even empires.
Correct.
Now you reduce them to clans. And these are people that have languages. You reduce them to tongues, which, they like saying, vernaculars or something like that. So, to me, that is actually sort of a neo-colonial anthem compared to Arise or Compatriots, which was trying to capture the reality of the history that had transpired in Nigeria since former independence from Britain. So I hope it is reversed, and perhaps a future parliament will indeed reverse it in Nigeria.
Yeah. And also, to put a final note on it, I remember being in university in Nigeria, and when we sang the old anthem, it was usually to denote the fact that the country was acting like a neo-colonial state as a revolt. So now imagine, you now revert back to the same anthem that we used to critique the country. What you're now confirming?
You're now confirming that parliament is not made up of Thomas Sankaras, is what
exactly.
I can
tell you. Exactly. And it was, when I thought maybe it was a joke. But to understand,
when you brought it up as a topic for discussion, I really thought you were joking. I had to go and research and go and hear both versions of the anthem myself, which I did.
So for me,
Rodney once said, The things that happen in Africa, don't shock me anymore. So I can't say. I mean, of course, I'm disappointed, but I'm not shocked.
But this is the country that is supposed to be one of the movers and shakers on the continent. You would, I mean, with the greatest of respect to everybody else, you would least expect this.
Listen, those are my sentiments. I think Nigeria, is generally letting us down. It is Nigeria that should be providing us with the examples of Thomas Sankara, not tiny Burkina Faso. Because coming from a large country like Nigeria, the impact could be such more encompassing with the entire African continent. So, but I'm glad we need to critique things like this because it begins with seeing such as this.
Yes.
And the mindset.
Yes.
But I'm very hopeful as African people. We have to remain hopeful. And at the end of the day, the resources, no matter how much of the resources that they exploit, they cannot excavate all those riches we have on the ground. They cannot carry the abundant land that we have and transport it to Europe. They may colonize some African reactionary minds to work as their agents, but those days are becoming much more difficult as we're seeing in West Africa. And that's what we should continue doing. We should make it difficult and expensive for fellow Africans to sell us out and have Africans who want to use our resources and our intellectual capabilities and creativity to develop Africa.
Yes, on that very informative note, thank you very much, Brother Milton, and for coming through again, and for our guests, and also those who will view the video now and later. Do like, share, subscribe, and as usual, we bring you this information not because it's just part of the course, but we feel the days of having information about Africa or just passing through to the continent unfiltered, those days are long gone. And as long as we have the time, the breath, the resources, we'll continue to bring this show. So please support the channel, like, share, subscribe, and, put your comments in there. Feedback is welcome. Constructive criticisms, of course. And we thank you. Brother Milton, last words?
I'll just continue.
See you next week, Victory Asceta. Thank you very much for watching, and good night. I hope you found this week's episode informative. Join us next week on Adesoji Speaks Knowledge as we continue to help you reframe the narrative about the African continent, past and present, by providing you with accurate information to give you a true and clearer picture of events as it pertains to Africa. Please remember to subscribe, like, and share. Thank you.